The informants. A man and his wife were not too far from me, camping in the summer of 2000, and during their stay, they were experiencing some rather frightful events. The reason they contacted me was because they had come across the sighting, and because theirs happened so close to where mine was, they wanted to talk to me. They were camping for 2 weeks, and during this time their food was being taken, and even some clothes were missing. They thought maybe coyotes or even bears. But one morning, after hearing something in the campsite during the night, they woke up to find everything else tossed around the campsite. Even the guy's boat on the trailer was moved a few feet. One night in particular, something hit the side of the window and broke it. And in the morning, they found a large rock sitting there in the dirt. On another night, they said it sounded like a few people around outside their trailer, mumbling. Jill said it was like someone had their mouth full of food. I pictured the picture of a Sasquatch eating all their food and trying to talk to each other. After that morning, they cleaned up and had breakfast. When she would notice barefoot prints just off the side of their camper, and they said it was obvious to them by the size of the prints that their visitor during the night had to be a Sasquatch. Nothing else. They said that the prints were around 18 inches long. The man put his size 12 foot inside the print, and there were still 5 or so inches more than in his and length. They told me that a couple days later, they were out in the boat fishing and actually saw this thing in their campsite while they were out in the boat. Apparently, it was throwing their stuff around and making a mess of things. The couple describe a Sasquatch as a reddish-brown, with long arms and a funny-shaped head. They believed it to be a male because of its bulk size and height, which they said was about 7 to 8 feet tall. I asked if it could have been a bear, and they both replied, "As God is our witness, what we saw was a Sasquatch." After describing the arms, legs, and head and all, there was nothing else it could have been. Personally, judging by their body language and the way they were trembling while talking to me, I believe them 100%, no doubt whatsoever. The older couple said they waited in their boat for a while until they were certain it was gone. As fast as could, they choked everything into their camper and left the area. Only packing up properly when they got to town, where they ended up staying in the night. On August 5th, 2001, on New West Highway 287, which is 31 miles west of Palestine, Texas, I was traveling westbound at 65 miles per hour when I saw what looked like a bear cub, where a very large dog sitting in the middle of the road. I slowed down to 50 miles per hour. I hit my high beams and stopped about 20 yards away from the animal. I put on my 4-way flashers, turned on my interior spotlight. As I looked up, I saw a huge bipedal creature that I will call Bigfoot. It walked from the soft shoulder of the road to the animal in the road. I am pretty sure it was a male walked in front of my tractor. He shielded his eyes, not seemingly out of shyness, but more as an effort to protect his eyes from the bright lights. I reduced my headlights to a low beam, but decided not to turn them off, as I was in the middle of the highway. I was doing my best to protect them by blocking the road with my tractor trailer. The big male went over to what I realized was a toddler. He grabbed his shoulder and attempted to grab the little one's arm. The little one scooted away like a child trying to get away from a parent that wants the child to go somewhere, and the child doesn't want to go. The little one had a greater agility than the big male. The little one squirmed, scrambled, and scooted further up the road where they were. Then something caught my eye and ear, directly next to my driver's window. I casually looked over, and within 2 feet of my face was a female. No doubt female. She had nursing breasts and extended nipples. Her eyes were almost even with my eye level. I measured it from where the top of her head came up to my mirror. It was 7 foot 4 inches tall. The male was at least 1 foot taller than her. Plus some, she had a gay me smile, but it didn't stink. Immediately upon seeing her, I smiled with all the teeth I have from the interior spotlight, which was pointed down toward my lap. I am sure she was able to see me clearly. I certainly saw her clearly, so clearly I could smell her and feel her breath. I particularly noticed the volume of air that she breathed. Not out of breath or even heavy breathing, just a large volume of air with each breath. I again smiled at her and asked, "Is the baby okay?" She slowly smiled back at me. I noticed a dental anomaly. Either she had a double row of teeth or the crowns of her teeth were split on the top center to give the impression of 2 rows of teeth. She then reached into the tractor and stroked my beard like I do when I'm thinking my beard is mid-chest length and multicolored. It was then I realized the large male's head was identical to mine. Although his beard was shorter, the female had thin facial hair on her chin. The rest of his fur was dark brown with traces of gray and white on his shoulders, back, and chest. She was a mixture of brown and reddish fur, mostly reddish-brown. As she took her hand off my beard and took her hand out of my tractor, I extended my hand out to her. She sandwiched my hand between her 2 hands, and her 2 hands were easily 2 to 3 times bigger than mine. Her hands felt like rough neckwork gloves or rough leather. At this point, she gave me a soulful look. From her facial expressions and her watery eyes, I took what she was saying. "Thank you for not running over my baby." The eyes were not dead eyes. They were bright and moist, just very dark brown, but not black. The large male had the child under his arm like a sack of potatoes. He never looked directly at me as I watched him walk back into the tree line. I noticed at least 3 more, I suspected, even more. At the tree line, they arranged from the height of a female to slightly shorter, but none came close to the size of the male. They arranged from the height of a female to slightly shorter, but none came close to the size of the male. Forget about the wild man. A Borneo, back in the early 1900s, we had our own wild man right here in Wood County, Wisconsin. In August of 1910, the local papers were full of stories of encounters with the Wood County wild man. Marshfield, Stevens Point, Oshkosh, and Grand Rapids newspapers all has stories with various details about the strange man near Auburndale. It was first reported that Marshfield was in terror over the wild man who was living in the forest surrounding Auburndale on August 15th. He said he occasionally appeared in the open wearing only a shirt, more abbreviated than a Scottish kilt. Reporters were quick to point out the man had been seen in broad daylight, and the story was neither a hoax nor hallucination. Though to inhabit a wooded spot near the old George Zellinger place, the unkept man was called wild as a hawk, and his actions. The Eckwells who resided there had seen him many times, but any attempt to approach him, he made off his lair with the speed of a deer. He puts one hand on a fence post and vaults 5-wire fence as easy as a college athlete, and his speed defies pursuit, according to one story. A group of men and boys had tried to surround and approach him, but he leaped a fence and went into the ground in deep thickets. Local berry pickers were given this domain a wide berth as authorities tried to capture him. Officer Smid and Thompson from Marshfield and Sheriff Griffin to Grand Rapids had been searching, but had only managed to elude them, never allowing them a glimpse. A subsequent story joked that they were especially anxious to catch him so he could be the star attraction of the street fair of the following week. The wild man became such a hot topic that Griffin and Schmidt actually perpetuated a joke on a salon keeper with the aid of a Curly Babcock, who impersonated the wild man in realistic style, giving a rise to the story that had been apprehended. Another time, Officer Thompson and Di Andrews made fruitless trip to the area where he was often seen. Unlike Griffin and Schmidt, though, they extended sympathy toward the man, stating it was likely the new man was deranged, but since no one had reported anything missing, it was different and difficult to say that the man was or where he came from. Meanwhile, in Plover, 21-year-old William Enns, who was living in the woods of Plover, milking cows and stealing food in the nighttime, was captured, examined, and found insane and committed to the Northern Asylum. Likewise, in the woods of Colby, wildman Herman Schneider, who was living on a game in roots, eventually was captured and hospitalized. And Wood County, however, No reports are ever made of the wild man's capture. Who was he, and what was his story? Who knows? But perhaps the wood lesson is true, and maybe it does have its very own Bigfoot, a throwback to this early wild man. The Lummi Indian Reservation is in the inland northwest corner of Washington, 8 miles west of Bellingham, and 20 miles south of the Canadian border in western Whatcom County, after receiving several reports of Sasquatch sighting on the Lummi Nation. Indian Reservation, Lummi, Police Sergeant Ken Cooper, was called to the residence of 78-year-old Emma Smith on the night of October 23rd of 1975. She reported a Bigfoot attempt to break into her house, and she had fled in terror. Sergeant Cooper found the plastic of the storm door had been torn, and the door's wooden frame splinter. Boards had also been torn from a nearby smokehouse, but he could not find the creature nor any person. He returned to the residence around 2 a.m., shining the spotlight from his patrol car into the woods. He found a group of 7 people already there, with their own spotlight set directly on a huge, 7.5-foot tall, hairy creature. Cooper aimed his 12-gauge shotgun at the creature. Concerned that it would be a human in a costume, he yelled, "If there's somebody just fooling around, you better knock it off, because we have weapons." The creature just crouched down. As Sergeant Cooper stepped forward, the creature lowered himself down even further, until only his head was showing above the brush, for 20 minutes. Sergeant Cooper and the other people stared down the crouching, hairy creature until they heard noises in the brush to the right. People said that they were seeing more Bigfoots there at that point. Cooper decided it was time for them to leave the scene. He returned to the location after dawn and found bare footprints in the forest-covered ground. He measured the footprints, and they were 18 inches long and 7 inches wide. Over the coming weeks, the Lummi Tribal Police received over 100 reports of sightings of Bigfoot creatures. Sergeant Cooper himself saw Bigfoot 2 more times shortly after the first encounter. A veteran hunter from Maple Falls, Washington, named Such, was scout hunting areas while south of the Canadian border on the U.S. side, due west of NF 3140, but somewhere east of the South Pass Road, stopping to rest. He was sitting up against a tree off of a well-worn game trail, waiting and resting. He was sitting in complete camouflage gear, listening to something walking up from behind. He said he sat frozen because it was 2 legs sounding. He could hear it breathe. His heart was pounding in his chest for more time than he said he cared to admit, because he was there, and there was no trail behind him. Such never did see whatever made the crashing footsteps in the brush behind him finally. Another hunter walked up on the game trail in front of him, and as the man walked past him with his pack and rifle, Such hollered out, "Hello," scaring the other hunter nearly to death. Such realized he scared the fellow hunter because he jumped sideways and asked him if he wanted to sit down with him, welcoming the company of another hunter who said he was from Nooksack, Washington area. The Nooksack man sat down, and of course the conversation told Such that he had encountered something that he had never seen before in those woods, which is why he was so nervous. He attracted something up near where Such had been sitting around, and Such figured that was why he was powered passing behind him earlier moments before the Nooksack. Man never did say what he thought he saw, only that it was covered with hair, like a bear, and maybe 8 to 9 feet tall, huge and walking on 2 legs like a man walks. He said it was no bear, of that I'm sure. From the description, Such thought it was a Sasquatch, and he told the Nooksack man what he thought the man had saw. And then he went quiet. He got up and left, and went back down the game trail. You never get this man to see, or ever meet him again. I grew up one of those tiny towns around Texas Hill Country in Bandera County. As a kid back in the late 70s, I used to play with a neighbor lady's grandson who would come down every summer from Baltimore, Maryland to stay with her for 2 weeks. He was a real big city boy. Everybody pretty much has a rural resident area where all residents connect quickly with the woods. One afternoon, I went to visit the neighbor boy who was there visiting. He was a bit spoiled and was allowed to stay up till 4 or 5 a.m. every night, watching TV, and then sleep till early afternoon the next day. But this day, he was freaked out because he told me that the night before at around 3 a.m., he had happened to look out his window and saw a huge man-thing walk very briskly down another neighbor's long gravel driveway and disappear into the darkness and woods behind their house. This neighbor had a streetlight on their carport that lit the whole area at night where he saw the thing. His view was unobstructed and about 75 yards away. He said the thing covered 50 or 60 yards. Within a few seconds, when I first began to believe him, was when we were dirt biking a day or two later down a long, desolate county road, unpaved on my dirt bike. He kept asking me. He was on the back of my dirt bike. When we were going to turn around, we got to the end of the road, and I killed the bike and pretended it wouldn't start. This poor kid was screaming at the brush and scanning it like he was scared to death. Something would come out and get us. He was panicking and crying and saying that we had to get out of there because we have these things roaming around. Seeing him so freaked out got me a little freaked out too. We laughed. We were both about 11 or 12 at the time. I now live in San Antonio. Last winter, our 10 News had a brief blurb about 2 men witnessing either 1 or 2 Sasquatch chasing deer off Highway 51, which is a little connector road that runs between the northwest outskirts of town. This subject is fascinating. I learned after reading a lot of stories that they don't just dwell in tall forest. There are a lot of sightings in low brush county. I wish I had a lot more info about the deer chasing incident. A few weeks after a camping trip I took, I was at home on Norrell Street in Channelview, Texas, east of Houston, just north of I-10. We had a house that was L-shaped with a small storage room on the north side. Between the storage room and the inside corner of the L was a concrete patio, and next to the storeroom was the sliding back door that went into the den/family room. It was about 9 or 10 p.m., and I was getting ready to go to bed. I was in the bathroom that was next to the inside corner of the aisle, and it had a window that looked out onto the patio at the back of the house. The light was on next to the back door, so you can see everything that was on the patio up to the side of the storeroom. As I finished my shower and was drying off, I can see the full shape of someone standing at the back sliding door looking into the den where my dad was sitting. My dad was in the lounge, show with his back to the door watching the television. That was on the opposite wall, although the bathroom window had water on it from the steam. I could see that this thing was looking and was bent forward in order to have his head low enough to be able to see in the house. This was a big person, both in height and bulk, and that was when I decided to wipe the window with my towel. I should have turned the light off in the bathroom first, but I didn't. And just as I started to wipe the window, it stood up. It looked at me, turned, and with one step was off the patio and around the storage room before I could get a good look at it. I remember right, the size of the patio was 6 foot by 12, so it would have taken at least a few feet to get off the ree. It had to take one step that covered about 5 feet to get off the patio anyway. I covered myself with the towel and went to the den when my dad was thinking he may have fallen asleep with the TV, like he usually did. But he was awake in his chair, and I told him what I saw. He looked at me and said, "Yeah, I know. I can see the shadow from the back door on the floor in the den." Hearing anything, I decided to head back. It was getting late, and it still thought I'd ride up the Forest Service to the top. As I get closer to the top, I noticed it looked somewhat open, and the rocks looked like a fortress. When I reached the top, the Forest Service road installed these Kelly Bump Stoke ATV Sautis. It turned around. I noticed the climb would not be too bad, maybe 10 or 15 yards, not real steep. I parked at the bottom of the switch, backset the brake, and turned off the quad as I swung my leg over. That's when I heard every clear and very close knock, or should I say hide. It sounded like my helmet was full blasting music, but it wasn't. It was such a loud sound. I scanned the top, which is where the knocks came from. I still have trouble telling about this. What I felt, I knew I should have left, but I was just interested. As it drove down the many small switchbacks, I was looking everywhere. I knew I was being watched. I was hoping I was not being chased. It took a while to tell the guys what had happened. I'm sure there are lots of folks up there who camp and hike, and if never hears anything strange, but I've been going up there with my brother for the past 4 or 5 years. And this was a first for me. The story started flowing, and after I mentioned it, it trained the next days of my mother, and I doubled up on the quad. It went back to the same spot, only this time there were no sounds whatsoever. We parked and walked across the Kelly bumps and down the other side. He's looking for turkey sign. I'm looking everywhere. Else we came to an opening with a blind in it. We traveled about a half a mile. I hunted the next opening, and my brother went back to the quad. I made my way back to the camp and never realized how close a scenario. This all was one of the other guys went to the train after dark when he came out to our tent and wanted to know if we were trying to scare him with the growls and huffing sounds. That was not off. That's definitely off limits. He blew it off as a bear. But I'm not so sure. Finn arrested my brother, could give exact location, not to mention another report that happened to him and his son this past elk season. My name is X. I'm an 8-year veteran of the U.S. Army with a clearance to lose, so please keep my name out. Sometime in 2001. My now ex-wife and I were driving towards Granton, Pennsylvania on Highway 81. It was late at night. My wife and I were talking to help break the monotony. I just noticed a very dark object leaning over the edge of the road as we drove past. We passed extremely close to the object. Close enough for me to feel the shock, to see a very large hairy section of wall. Muscled leg and big hairy wrist, and a hand as the creature turned and strode to walk the embankment as we passed. The area we were driving through was through a mountainous area of the Pennsylvania section. The incline he had to have gone down several hundred feet at a sharp angle. My wife screamed and grabbed me. I slammed on the brakes and reached for my 20-gauge Max shotgun. My wife screamed again and hysterically told me no way in the hell was I getting out of the car. I try my best to tell her, hey, I'm combat trained. I have a weapon. I just have to see what the hell it was. But she would have none of it and kept freaking out in disgust. I drove off mad at the world for letting me get a tiny glimpse of one of the world's greatest mysteries. What a tease the whole thing was. I wanted to see the entire thing for myself. But what can I say? It looked like a linebacker with a serious hair issue. I would estimate it would have been at least 7-8 feet tall. What really surprised me was the attitude of the thing. No fear of our vehicle at all. My wife and I have both seen bear before and agreed it was not a bear. What bear can walk down an incline on his hind legs? I spent the rest of the trip starting out the window, wishing I had seen more of whatever it was. And mine too, all at once. The canyon was dead silent, which is very unusual being in a canyon. Even the most slightest noises seemed to echo down the canyon, down the air. There was always this horrible smell that I would relate to something dead mixed in with a very musky smell, as I told my daughter to get in the house. I noticed that my dog was cowering under the house and refused to come out when I tried to call him in the house. Living in the mountains is such a remote place is not unusual to see or hear mountain lions, black bears, pumas, elks in the lake, and I'm familiar with the sounds of these animals. My dog has chased without fear or sense. I should say all of the animals above, and he has never cowered, even when he is charged by a bolo during the rutting season. Until that evening, that was the quietest night I've ever experienced there. Not the unusual dogs barking in the distance, but dead quiet. The only noise I heard was the occasional crashing and breaking of wood, like something big was out in the woods. I'm not saying what it was because I didn't see it, but to this day in my mind, I know what it was. This memory will be with me for the rest of my life.